So again, I wanted to welcome everybody to the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit in the Parks Grant Writing Workshop webinar. The first thing I'd like to do today is actually ask a few of you questions. So if you could, for me, use your buttons on the far right-hand, or excuse me, far left-hand side of the screen to indicate where you're joining us from today. As I had mentioned, our presenters are also joining us from other parts of the country, so we certainly have a very national representation here today. I'll keep the poll open just for a few more seconds while people cast their votes. All right, great. It looks like we have a number of people joining us from the West today, but we wanted to provide you some information on who's joining us as far as where they're from, and this will also help our presenters as well when they're speaking to you. My next question is, how many people are in your location today? If you're just joining us at your desk by yourself, you can just select one person. However, if you're in a room or an office with more than one person, if you can identify that as well. Okay, it looks like the majority of the folks are joining us just from their computers today, but we do have at least 10 folks or 10 connections that have more than 2 or 3 people in the room. If that is the case, we are going to ask you to do one last thing for us before the webinar is over, and that's simply just to email us a list of the participants that are joining from your location today, and we ask that you submit them to jenny.west@triptech.org. And I have one more question for you. Which agency are you with? And this will certainly help our presenters identify specific topics or questions or subjects that they need to address when they're presenting today. All right, it looks like everybody is done. The majority of the folks today seem to be from the National Park Service, but it looks like we've got some great representation from also the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest, even U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have a few that are from city, town, or transit providers, and then a number who have also identified themselves as others. So welcome to all of you. And if you are from an FLMA, are you from a unit, a region, a nation, or other? Great. Thank you so much for completing that question as well. Looks like the majority of the folks are from units, but we also have some regional, national, and some who have also identified themselves as other. Just a few more questions for you. My next question is, what is your previous experience with the Transit and Parks program? Okay, great. It looks like many of you have already received funding previously. A few, or at least one, have applied but have not received funding. A few have not applied but previously knew about the program, and a few also have just learned about the program recently. So welcome to everybody. And my last question for you before we get started is, are you considering applying for a planning grant or an implementation grant? All right, it looks like the majority of the folks are going to be applying for implementation grants, followed by planning grants. A few of you who are just new to the program aren't sure yet, and a few of you are not sure which grant to apply for. So this experience will certainly be educational for you, and I know that our presenters have a lot of great information for you. So I wanted to quickly introduce you to your presenters today. The first presenter is Adam Schildke. He is a program manager from the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks program at the Federal Transit Administration. And as the FTA's program manager, he coordinates the annual grant solicitation and evaluation process. He oversees the research, the technical assistance, and the project grants already funded by the program. And Adam has a Master of Urban Planning from Hunter College in New York and a BA from Middlebury College in Vermont. Your second presenter today is Phil Shapiro. He is the Deputy Director of the Technical Assistance Center. He oversees technical assistance services provided by the TAC and manages ongoing outreach and communication for federal land managers. He has over 40 years of experience providing transportation, technical assistance to federal, state, and local entities throughout the country. He has an MS in Civil/Transportation Planning from Northwestern University and a BS in Civil Engineering from Pennsylvania State University. Our last presenter today is Jamie Eiswick, who is a PE and is the resource manager for the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Technical Assistance Center and a research engineer with the Western Transportation Institute. She has over 10 years of experience developing transportation solutions for federal lands. She has an MS in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M University and a BS in Civil Engineering from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So welcome to all of them. Our agenda for today will include a general overview of the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and the Parks Technical Assistance Center from the Federal Transit Administration, or Adam will present that, followed by a Section 2, which is Planning for Alternative Transportation, or Planning Grants. Section 3, Jamie will address different types of grants, both implementation and capital grants, followed by a brief summary. So without any further ado, I will hand over the presentation to Adam.
Thank you very much, Amber. I appreciate the introduction and also for conducting all of those polls. One thing I noticed is that, we have 68 guests on the webinar today. We have a number of people who are only just learning about the program, and even more importantly, a number who aren't sure whether they would like to apply for an implementation grant or a planning grant. So we've structured this presentation today to help people understand what the difference is between these types of projects and how to submit an application for either. So thanks also to Jamie and Phil for participating in this today, and I'll get started by introducing the Department of Transportation and the Federal Transit Administration. So FTA is part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. We're one of 12 operating administrations that manage programs related to different forms of transportation. You'll be aware of the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Highways, Federal Railroad. Well, there's 12 total, and they go all the way down to pipelines and hazardous material safety. But FTA's responsibility is for supporting public transportation throughout the country. We provide support to transportation providers from the largest urban rail systems like New York City, Chicago, down to the smallest rural paratransit service. All of our programs were authorized by Congress in 2005 through the SAFETEA, and like the rest of government, we're currently operating under a continuing resolution for appropriations, but we're also operating under an extension of our authorization. So we have quite a number of things going on these days at DOT. So the way that FTA promotes public transportation throughout the country can generally be broken down into three ways. And the largest one is that we provide capital and planning grants to states and public transportation providers. Last year, we provided over $8 billion in the form of grants to these transportation systems to pay for major capital projects, metropolitan planning, system rehabilitation. We have about 15 grant programs, each of which has a slightly different size and a slightly different focus. We also participate in planning and NEPA reviews, providing assistance and oversight over grantees' projects. And we sponsor demonstration projects, technical assistance centers, and research to promote the development of public transportation in America. So I'll start here with, I'll continue rather, with the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks program. This is one of our somewhat smaller and much more specific grant programs. It provides capital and planning grants. It's open to federal lands, units of federal land management agencies, as well as nearby communities. I'll get into the exact specifications on eligibility in a moment. Grants are for alternative transportation. Applications are evaluated using a competitive process that involves multiple agencies: the National Park Service, the Forest Service, BLM, Federal Highways, and Federal Transit Administration all participate in evaluating grants. And technical assistance is available through our Transit and Parks Technical Assistance Center, 2 members of whom are participating in the webinar today. There'll be more information on them available shortly. Just as a background to the program was set up by Congress in 2005 to help federal land units and their surrounding communities deal with traffic congestion that was negatively affecting both the experience the visitors were having when they arrived at federal land units such as national parks, refuges, and forests, and the ability of those land units to protect and conserve their sensitive natural cultural resources that were being degraded by excessive private vehicle traffic. These needs were identified in a congressional study that came out in 2001, which is also available from the TAX website. So the program goals were spelled out by Congress, and they are to enhance the environment within land units, protect natural resources from adverse impacts, conserve natural, historical, and cultural resources, support the resource management goals of the federal land agencies that are charged with stewarding these resources, improve visitor mobility, accessibility, and the visitor experience when visiting recreational areas, and to reduce congestion and pollution. These goals form the basis for how we evaluate applications for funding. Now, the management goals that FTA has defined for running the program, we aim to select the most meritorious projects, which we base on a careful and quantitative evaluation process. We look to develop the best possible solutions to current or anticipated transportation problems based on well-documented need. We aim to use federal funds wisely by selecting the most financially efficient and sustainable projects, many of which include partner organizations. So we do definitely look to make sure that projects are sustainable for the long term. We support the objective analysis and comparative planning processes to ensure that projects are well planned. And lastly, we encourage project variety, both in terms of geographic diversity, that they take place across the country in different states, that we have both urban and rural projects. We look for projects that are quite large, as well as projects that are small and just getting off the ground. We also look for new projects in addition to existing projects, to balance the need to invest in new places to expand the program and expand alternative transportation, as well as to keep the investment going in well-functioning current systems. So in terms of eligibility, there are 3 parts to eligibility. There's eligible areas, which defines where projects can be funded. There's eligible applicants, which defines who can receive funds. And there's eligible projects, which I'll get to on the next slide. So eligible areas refer to any federally owned or managed land unit that's open to the general public. So the project would have to take place within the vicinity of an eligible area. And if you're not an eligible area yourself, if you're not an eligible applicant, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, let's go. Eligible applicants refer to those federal land management agencies and their units, as well as state, local, or tribal governments and their subsidiaries, such as transit authorities, highway authorities, similar, with jurisdiction in the vicinity of an eligible area. So if you are one of those non-federal government applicants, you'll need to obtain a letter of support for your project from the eligible area, from the land unit. I'll be able to answer questions on this at any time. One other note here, nonprofit organizations such as friend groups or community organizations that would like to pursue projects on their own are not eligible to receive funding directly from the federal government, but they are eligible to be partners to an application by an eligible applicant. So probably the most important slide here is defining alternative transportation. The program has it defined as transportation by bus, rail, or any other publicly or privately owned conveyance that provides to the public general or special service on a regular basis, including sightseeing service. This includes a non-motorized transportation system. So in other words, bicycle pathways are eligible, buses, rail, anything that you would understand as being public transportation, plus non-motorized transportation systems that serve a transportation purpose. So we've got some examples of eligible projects. Buses, trams, and shuttles, transit facilities such as bus stops, passenger shelters, sheds for storage of vehicles, rail vehicles and maintenance equipment, waterborne vessels and ferry docks, bicycles, pedestrian pathways, and intelligent transportation systems that are dedicated to improving the functioning of an existing alternative transportation system. Okay, now I've got a couple slides here with actual planning projects that were funded with the last year's grants. And going through these here, the Harpers Ferry National Park received a grant to study expanding their existing transit system. They wanted to acquire more vehicles and serve additional sites that they'd recently incorporated into their park. Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge pursued a study that they called the Inside the Fence Transit Feasibility Study for initiating public transit service at a site that was gradually ramping up towards more intensive visitor use. The Red Hill Special Recreation Area, which is a BLM unit, received money to conduct a study to evaluate alternatives for pedestrians accessing the BLM site from the town across a state highway. And Coronado National Forest received the grant to do a NEPA study and a design stage for a trails enhancement project. In terms of implementation projects, we've also funded in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. We helped them purchase a rail inspection truck as well as a maintenance vehicle. In Deschutes National Forest, we helped them replace a shuttle bus. Gateway National Recreation Area received funding to reconstruct a ferry dock breakwater to support future ferry service in the New York City region. And Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore received a grant to construct 2.5 miles of a multi-user pathway that was able to help visitors to the lakeshore get off a congested roadway and use their bicycles on a nice summer day when they would be going to the beach. So aside from breaking projects down into planning and implementation, I also wanted to point out certain projects that were funded through third-party grantees, non-federal grantees, and you can see that a variety of the ones I just listed here were actually pursued in partnership with federal land units by non-federal grantees. In the Deschutes National Forest project, the shuttle acquisition and the operation of the system is actually done by Utah Transit Authority. In Red Hill Special Recreation Area, the actual applicant was the town of Carbondale, Colorado, which was having trouble with their own residents accessing the BLM lands, particularly school groups. Sitka National Historic Park in Alaska received a grant, and that was applied for and provided to the Sitka tribe. And the project in Sleeping Bear Dunes, the grantee was actually the Michigan Department of Transportation, who was able to actually do the construction on that project. So some projects that would be eligible, but not always, we wanted to discuss here. As I mentioned before, Intelligent Transportation Systems, ITS, it needs to be related to an alternative transportation system. That's a lot of acronyms and a lot of use of the word transportation. But basically, a computerized system or an ITS system that exists to manage the parking lots or visitor traffic distribution would not be considered eligible as part of an alternative transportation system. Likewise, parking lots need to serve, say, a shuttle or a trail. They shouldn't just be expanded parking for visitors. Visitor experience studies and carrying capacity studies are often very important parts of a planning study. However, we ask that they really serve all the goals of the program and are integrally related to a future transportation investment. Likewise, recreational trails, they need to serve a transportation purpose to really help achieve the goals of the program. I think on one of the rotating slides before we started, there was a slide there, or a photo of 3 or 4 mountain bikers, roaring down a trail. Something like that is not necessarily eligible if it doesn't inspire them to leave their cars and pursue that bicycling as an alternative means of seeing the land unit. Likewise, staff and employee transportation is not really the goal of the program. And projects outside federal lands are certainly eligible in most cases, providing that the applicant receives a letter of support that they supply along with their application from that federal land unit. Some types of applications that are not eligible, and most of these are fairly obviously not congruent with the purposes of the program, but those include roads and private vehicle transportation investments, projects that are exclusively serving state and local parks. There wouldn't be an opportunity there to get a letter of support from a federal land agency. I mentioned before that applications by private organizations and nonprofits, they cannot receive money directly from the federal government, but as I mentioned before, they can be a partner to an application from an eligible recipient. And lastly, the types of projects that we can fund only include capital projects, that's the purchase of equipment, or planning projects. Capital projects do include preventative maintenance. However, other costs of operating a system on a daily basis, such as purchasing fuel and paying the salaries of operators, is not an eligible expense. So to break that down a little bit further, planning grants cover all aspects of gathering information, studying transportation needs and alternatives, and working with stakeholders and the public. There's a variety of steps here, including determining the need for a project, identifying possible solutions, evaluating alternatives, and conducting the required environmental analysis that need to be completed before applying for an implementation grant. Implementation grants, as I mentioned, cover all aspects of the capital costs of acquiring or constructing or supervising or even inspecting equipment or a facility that's for use in public transportation. And that does include incidental expenses such as design, engineering, location surveying, mapping, acquiring rights of way or other real property, or other such fixed costs. It also includes leasing vehicles or the capital costs if you contract for a transit service. Again, it doesn't include operations, but it does include maintenance, which can be a part of a project's budget. So we require that all projects that are funded through the program, first, really, they have to be properly planned. This helps ensure that projects comply with NEPA, but it also ensures a high-quality project. So what is planning? Planning encompasses multiple stages, and it starts with a careful process of examining the current situation and defining current and upcoming challenges and needs. The next step is identifying multiple alternative approaches to addressing those needs, evaluating them all together with stakeholders and the affected public, and finally selecting a project and ensuring that it complies with all applicable environmental regulations. The breakdown of stages can certainly be done in different ways, but essentially each part of the process has a clear benefit to the ensuing project. For example, the early stages of pre-planning, they ensure that you understand the dimensions of need, and in that way, as you move forward, you can understand seasonal requirements, your peak demand numbers, the resources that are available to you to continue a system. Alternative analysis ensures that you select the most financially sustainable project, and they rely on estimations of potential ridership and use, and really look at what the most cost-effective solution is, both immediately and over the long term. Obviously, public outreach and stakeholder involvement ensures that you properly understand the community's needs, and that you attain community support for your project. And it also helps you to acquire partners earlier on in the process, at which point you can develop a project that really meets both parties' needs and to which others can also contribute financially to. And lastly, the environmental review process. It minimizes the negative impacts, of course, but it also provides the legal security that's required when you're going to pursue a project and helps make sure that the project progresses quickly. So if you're unsure still whether to apply for a planning or an implementation grant, below are some of the prerequisites for receiving an implementation grant. With the exception of actually applying for funding at the very bottom there, all of these activities can be funded with the Transit and Parks Planning Grant. You can apply for a single grant, possibly that incorporates multiple stages if they're really close together, but also in many cases we would support applicants applying for multiple planning grants as they move through the process. For example, it would be very difficult to decide to fund a project for a full NEPA EIS if the earliest stages of pre-planning haven't yet been completed. So just once again to sort of reiterate the life cycle of a project, there's numerous planning steps that go in before an implementation project, and then again feedback into the planning process. After you've purchased a vehicle or started a transportation system, you'll want to go back and assess, and this is very important, how well that system is addressing the needs that you identified early in the process. And that's where you can look at ridership, you can look at resource protection, and really refine it for the next go around. So getting down to more important stuff, or what we might call the nitty-gritty, all applicants should definitely take a chance to review the Notice of Funding Availability, which we published in the Federal Register last Thursday. The notice announces the competition for funds officially and includes all the information that you must know to apply. It basically contains FTA's official implementation of the program, and often when I receive questions about the program, this is right where I go to find the answers. So if you've heard something that this might be a particular date something's due, or this type of project might be eligible, or this counts as implementation but not planning, very often you'll be able to find the answer in here. Or of course, you're certainly welcome to call us or your regional contacts. So moving on to the application, this is one of the handouts today, so it might be advisable to download this prior to the next section so that you can follow along. But to just basically go through this quickly so you're familiar with it, the application has two parts. There's a standard response form that you see here, and there's a narrative response section. The questions here are pretty much self-explanatory and are primarily directed at the federal land unit. So if you are the federal land unit, we're asking about the conditions at your site, and if you are a gateway community, we're asking about the conditions at the federal land unit. In some cases, also on roads that you oversee yourselves or other transit systems. And also very important, there are two separate applications. There's an application for the planning grants, and there's an application for the implementation projects that ask slightly different questions. So please do make sure you're filling out the proper form. So the heart of the application then is the narrative. It's not shown here, but the application consists of a one-page executive summary and a two-page project description. The executive summary, these will be described in a little bit more detail later, but the executive summary should really be the one-page takeaway that explains what's going on. And the two-page project description should get into the details about what you propose to do with the grant should you receive it. If it's an implementation grant, we would like to know the type of construction, the number of vehicles, the potential routes you're serving. And if it's a planning project, really, we'd like to know the methodology you hope to pursue and the steps that you will be going through. Phil will get more into that in the next section. But again, we've included the image of the application here so that people are familiar with what we talk about when we discuss the sections. Each one of these questions you can see here, and most likely not read, are individual short response sections that ask you to demonstrate the need both in multiple areas and to assess the potential benefits of the program. Now, getting into how projects are evaluated, planning projects and implementation projects are evaluated very similarly, but with a couple key differences that are very important to know. Planning projects are evaluated primarily on how well they demonstrate the need for an alternative transportation planning study based on the program's goals and how they propose to gather information to assess alternatives. You can see that 50% of the rating is based on how well the need for a project is demonstrated and what the level of that need is. And then smaller portions of the smaller weightings are given to how the application plans to assess and gather information as to how their particular project is likely to address these goals. So once more, we're not looking for how a project down the road will improve visitor mobility or the environment, but how your planning study will assess the possibility of a transportation project achieving these goals. One other quick note on planning projects. There are projects that are farther along, say they're looking for an environmental assessment and they've already done the pre-planning and they've already done the alternatives analysis. In these cases, the applications should describe the goals of the analysis in the appropriate section, but they can describe the findings of the earlier studies in other sections. So if the environmental analysis will look at the environmental benefits and you already have analyzed the financial feasibility, how well it suits your management goals, and how it will affect visitor mobility, you can put in those sections what previous studies have found, as long as they're well referenced. In terms of implementation projects, this is a little bit more straightforward. Each section is given an equal weighting, and the evaluation looks at how well the capital project will provide those anticipated benefits. So basically, as the title says, these are basic application instructions. The limit is 10 pages of written responses. That doesn't include the short or the form, the initial form, the standard form. There's no limit on photos, maps, and graphics. Those can be included in an appendix. It's okay, of course, to delete the question instructions, because you saw in the previous document it takes up quite a lot of space. Please use a reasonable font size. Take care not to overuse bold, and do not repeat responses to criteria. But said a little bit more simply, please be as clear as possible in describing what the transportation problem is and what the proposed approach will be. Many of our reviewers individually have to read over 70 or 80 applications, and applications that tend to repeat responses that are somewhat difficult to comprehend will not really be doing themselves a service there in terms of our understanding and being able to effectively evaluate the project.
And Adam, actually, there are a couple of questions if
Great.
you wanted to take a break real quick.
Yes,
the
thanks.
first question is, are affiliated units for federal land management agencies, such as the National Heritage Area, eligible for TRIP funding?
The rule is the land area has to be either federally owned or managed. In some cases, affiliated areas they do not actually have any land that is managed or owned by the federal government. Certain national heritage corridors, for instance, will receive support from the National Park Service, but the land is actually owned by private landowners or the state or the county, and it's actually not even, say a facility there is managed by the state. Those wouldn't count. Areas that receive technical assistance from the Park Service are not eligible. But if you have any specific questions, I would strongly encourage people to contact me for further information.
Great. And just a few more questions. Again, specific, very similar to the last question, and that is, would funding be considered for trailheads or staging areas on public lands for non-motorized trail systems?
Well, short answer, I think it would be yes, provided that those facilities primarily serve those trails and that those trails and the proposed facilities do help the land unit achieve the goals of the program.
Great. And is a transportation authority eligible to receive money? For example, the Northern Arizona Intergovernmental Transit Authority.
Yes, in those cases, we consider them to be subsidiaries of state, local, county governments.
Great. And the next question is actually pretty easy, and it's where do they download the application form?
The application form is available on the FTA website. It's fta.dot.gov/transitinparks. one word, no the. So just Transit and Parks, and you'll find information there with a link to the NOFA, with a link to the planning guide, and a link that says application materials, I believe. Should be right at the top on the right-hand side, and that will link you to both the planning and implementation applications, as well as the proposal guidance document, which is also one of the many documents available for download here. And that basically walks people through the application and tries to address specific questions about types of projects and how to respond to criteria.
Great. And two last questions. If a state or local partner applies for a grant, do they receive the federal funds directly, or do the funds go to the local federal agency and then pass through to the local government?
Could you repeat the beginning of that?
Sure. If a state or local partner applies for the grant, do they receive the federal funds directly, or do the funds go to the local federal agency and then pass through to the local government?
No. In those cases, the grants are treated in two different ways depending on who the applicant and ultimate recipient is. If the applicant is a federal land unit, then the funds are transferred from FTA and headquarters directly through a single agreement with that land management agency through their Washington office that incorporates all of the projects, and then the funding for that project are devolved down to the unit level. If the applicant is a county, a state, or any other kind of non-federal applicant, the funding will be processed through an FTA regional office, either by becoming an FTA grantee, but more often by passing the funds through an existing grantee down to that local government, such as through the state DOT or a metropolitan transportation authority.
And I have three more questions, or would you like to proceed?
I don't mind. Questions are great.
Okay, great. We have a community park in which to create a trail across private land to BLM land with the Black Canyon Trail. BLM is one of our partners. Actually, it was more like a comment. I don't know if you want to comment specifically about it.
I would look forward to see the application.
Okay, great. And then,
as long as they get a letter from BLM supporting the project.
There you go. And can you submit a federal plan, a financial plan and the environmental study in one application?
It really depends on how well they're integrated, those two projects, and how long they anticipate them taking. If it makes more sense to phase that planning study over a longer period of time, then we would probably encourage a separate application for each stage. But if they're somewhat related in time and in scope, then one application would certainly be welcome.
Great. And very interesting political question is next. Has Congress obligated the 2011 TRIP grants, or is there a possibility that the grant program will be zeroed out or significantly decreased?
Well, that is the most important question. And I should have said that up front. We actually received permission from our executive director at FTA to put out this notice of funding availability with an unknown amount of funding available pending congressional appropriations. As with everybody else in the government, in the federal government, we've received a continuing resolution for what's now getting close to approximately half the year. So when those funds are then split among FTA programs, we at this point would have approximately half of the usual $25 million available for grants. However, pending an actual full-year budget resolution coming through, it is possible that Congress decides to not fund the program on a full-year basis. I'd like to say that that's considered somewhat unlikely, and I will say that. One other thing that we put in the notice of funding availability is that, say this issue with the continuing resolution goes on towards the end of the fiscal year and Congress finally decides how they're going to proceed further, and in short time they issue both a full year 2011 appropriation and a 2012 budget and appropriation. This program, this particular funding round, may actually pick twice the number of projects and use both appropriations, and that's all dependent upon timing. But we just wanted to get this out on the streets that people could submit applications so that if funding is available towards the end of this year, they would be able to pursue their projects in the next summer construction season.
Great. Thanks, Adam. That's it for the questions right now.
All right. So this, I think this is probably my last slide, or second to last. In terms of reviewing the application, like I just said, applications are evaluated against the program goals based on the information in the application. And we also consider those other factors. So let me quickly see if this is the last one. Oh yes, there's the timeline. Applications are due on May 9th. The NOFA was issued on March 10th. And in order to submit an application, you'll have to go through the federal government's grant clearinghouse website and system called grants.gov. This applies even if you are a federal agency, and your agency contacts will be able to provide specific information on how to conduct this process. We just encourage you to begin the registration process, no matter who you are, as soon as possible, because it requires obtaining a variety of registrations and identifying contacts within your agency who have certain kinds of authorizations prior to submitting the application. And lastly, all funding is contingent upon you meeting federal requirements for federal transportation dollars for whether you're a federal land unit or a direct grantee. And these involve things such as planning requirements and procurement requirements. And if you have any questions, please do check with us. Once grants are announced, typically pre-award authority is given, so that say you hear that you have received a grant to conduct a project, to say a planning study. At that point, if you're in compliance with all of those requirements, you're allowed to begin incurring charges that will then be covered by the grant. Please do be very careful with this, as in the past we've had people whose projects have not yet completed all the required planning steps, or maybe aren't yet in compliance with our procurement requirements, that then end up incurring charges that are not eligible for reimbursement. So on that happy note, well, I'll skip through this application process here. This is downloadable. I will pass it on to Phil Shapiro to talk about planning grants. Take it away, Phil.
Thank you, Adam. At this point, I usually ask if there are any more questions for Adam, but since there were so many already, I'm just going to move on, unless there's something burning in somebody.
There is actually one
last
last
some examples of, okay.
One last question for Adam. Just want to provide clarification that for FS applicants, they do not have to go through the CCR registration. FS is already registered in CCR, so applicants can avoid this step.
Thank you. I don't think that was a question. That was a clarification from the Forest Service, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Adam has done such a good job explaining it. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to add too much, but I'm going to try to explain a little bit more about the planning application and what should be included in that application. What are some examples of planning? They could be visitor utilization studies, transportation or traffic analysis studies, feasibility studies, comprehensive alternative transportation planning studies, which include other modes as well, by the way, environmental studies, and activities to comply with metropolitan statewide planning requirements. This is on the right is a graphic from a document called Transportation Planning Process for Transit and Federal Land Management Areas, and this can be obtained, the document can be obtained on the TripTAC website, as well as, I might point out also at that website is a link to the grant application information that Adam mentioned earlier, and that is at triptac.org. What do you do in a feasibility planning process? Figure out why you want to do it, define what the need is, come up with alternatives, and select, implement, and monitor those alternatives. The planning grant application is very comparable to the implementation grant in that it has 6 basic parts. There's an executive summary, a project description, the demonstration of need, and a methodology for assessing visitor mobility and experience benefits of projects. The difference between number 2, 3, and 4 between the implementation and planning is that in the planning grant, we aren't asking you to provide the information. We're asking that you provide information about how you will get the information that is needed, and that will be used in your implementation grant. Some of the tips for a planning application is make sure that you define your study's scope of work, objectives, and related measurements fairly well. Focus on methodology, not results. If you only address the benefits and not methodology, it will not be considered complete. We recommend that you not define individual tasks in too much detail. If this is a tricky one, you've got to be have to be clear enough about what you're doing so that the reviewers know that you are going to be doing a good job, but not so detailed that you can't make modifications once you've received the grant to improve on what you're doing based upon what you've learned. It's somewhat difficult to get scope deviations for funded projects. Let's first talk about the executive summary. Even though this is probably the last thing you should prepare, it's a one-page document. It should be the reviewer's first impression of the project and it builds a foundation for the proposal. Remember, as Adam said, there could be in excess of 80 applications that have to be reviewed by each of the reviewers, and if you do a really good job here, it'll help those reviewers concentrate on what's important and be able to do a better job of evaluating your application. And as I said earlier, I would create this after the rest of the application. A project description, this should be 2 pages, and this should describe the structure and the methodology of the proposed planning study. What steps you plan to follow, what analyses you plan to perform, how you involve the public and stakeholders, and what products you would be expecting from the planning process. I'm going to walk through just a little bit through the steps that one might follow for a planning process. First, perhaps establishing a steering committee or a technical advisory committee that might include unit staff of different offices that would have input, engineering, budget, others, and partners such as local, county, or state organizations that are involved with the unit, or perhaps even organizations such as friends groups or other groups that have a stake in the recreational activities or in the unit that's being considered. The next step would be to hypothesize the issues to describe your motivation for why you think you need to do a planning study. And one might say, why do you want us to hypothesize the issues? Because you really don't know the issues clearly until you finish the planning study, but you need to come in with some idea of what you're trying to address. And the planning study would then confirm those issues. You would refine some goals, objectives, and performance measures and use those to determine what data you might need, collect that data, and analyze that data. Then you would go into a opportunity to choose between solutions where you would formulate alternatives, evaluate them, and then select what you may be your next best action. Throughout the remainder of the presentation today, we are going to be working with an example location called Anywhere Refuge. It was established, by the way, Anywhere Refuge is a figment of our imaginations. But it has many of the characteristics that might exist in other land management areas. This unit was established in 1954. It's there to conserve the yellow striped lichen and the spotted blue grouse. It's located in the eastern Sierra Mountains. It has 8,000 acres, and there's a 10-mile wildlife drive that goes through the unit. They've had a considerable increase recently in visitation, and they have experienced problems with the parking of vehicles spilling over onto the habitats. So for this project, Anywhere Refuge has established a steering committee which included members from the refuge staff, the Gateway community, and the Friends group. They identified 3 issues that they think are driving the need for a study, and that the visitors are not really learning about the Grice and the lichen, that there's parking in the undesignated areas, which is just damaging the environment, and that there are speeding on the park roads, which is causing a number of different problems. So the next step that they propose to do is to to refine their project goals. Some examples are to manage access to reduce parking lot overflow, to slow the automobiles, to improve visitor interpretation, and to provide a financially sustainable transportation alternative. Pointing out here that improving visitor interpretation is an important part of this, in that it's improving the visitor experience. Related to those goals, they've come up with 3 major objectives. These objectives are measurable, and that's an important characteristic of an objective. First one is to allow only 250 vehicles to park in the refuge at any given time. They want to lower what is called the 85th percentile speed to 25 miles per hour, and they want to make sure that every visitor gets 10 minutes of ranger interpretation of some kind. So as part of their project, they are going to collect existing conditions data, such as the number of vehicles parked at different points throughout a given period of time, and then extrapolate that to their season. They're going to collect both spot speed and running speed on the access road and on the loop road, and they're going to determine how much interpretation, both face-to-face and otherwise, each of the visitors receives. They're then going to analyze the data and confirm the issues that they originally identified, as well as perhaps identify additional issues that data has illuminated. They suspect that there will be several different kinds of alternatives to their solution, including alternative transportation and traffic management issues. They will evaluate those alternatives and how well they achieve the objectives that they had set out earlier, including the ones we mentioned before, as well as how well they can be financed, both the cost and the revenue. And they intend to conduct a public meeting to get feedback from their community, the Gateway, as well as others. And I might point out that that is an important aspect of any planning project, is to engage your constituency so that they can have early buy-in and continue to support whatever you might result from your study. And then finally, the last part of this planning study, they anticipate to recommend a course of action that they would pursue. How do you determine how much money to ask for? Well, it's not necessarily an exact science, but you do need to include in your application. It's an important aspect of it, and we suggest that you include your budget and acquisition staff in as early as possible, so that they can help you brainstorm not only how much it will take, but also to identify if there are other funding sources that might be used as a matching fund, or not a matching, because I might point out this is one of the few FTA grant programs where there is not a matching requirement. However, if you have funding that's coming from other sources, that is a plus when the project is being evaluated for funding. As Adam said earlier, we suggest that you plan in multiple steps so that you can, as you go along, you learn more about what you need and you can get follow-on funding. If you intend to have a consultant do the work, you might want to get an initial quote from a consultant as to how much they, and I would get this from more than one, but essentially an estimate of what they think it would take to do the study that you are considering. Or if you have done similar work in the past, use that to determine what you think the time and the cost for the project would be. And when you put your application into the grants program, you should take the total cost and subtract that funding that you may have from other sources to determine how much you would be asking in the Sarbanes grant. All right. Well, as you may recall, I said earlier there were four numbered parts to the application. The first of those is demonstration of need, and I believe Adam had told you earlier that for the planning projects, this is worth 50% of your score. And there are two aspects to it. There's visitor mobility and experience, and then there's the environmental conditions as a result of the existing transportation system. Focusing on the demonstration of need, you should provide concrete descriptions, such as anecdotes, to illustrate how the transportation and environmental problems have affected your area. If you have any previous relevant data or documentation, you should include that. Visitor counts as well as trends in visitor counts are important. If you have any documentation of pollution or resource damage, including photographs that you may have, or any kind of documentation of traffic delays or parking, an excess amount of time to obtain a parking space, or other type of characteristics that might indicate the level of congestion you're facing, please include those as well. So for Anywhere Refuge, their demonstration of need included some data that showed that the visitation has doubled over the last 2 years, that the 2010 census indicated that their gateway community, there was a lack of privately owned autos there, such that the people who lived there had a hard time taking advantage of the refuge. They had experienced a TAG study, which is a Transportation Analysis Group study, which was arranged through the TAC, the Sarbanes TAC, that indicated that they had a need for a feasibility study, and they have shown that they have a parking shortage, which overflow parking at least 10 times a season, and that has caused parking in undesignated areas. And coinciding with those parking situation has been traffic congestion on the major road to the unit, as well as the unit road itself. And finally, they have been somewhat aghast at the fact that when people get there visiting their refuge, they really don't know as much as they would like about them to know about the lichen and the grass. For the environmental conditions, they have identified situations where cars have run over the grouse, and the lichen have been destroyed because vehicles have parked on top of them. And another impact of the parking outside of designated area was a compacting of soil, such that there was a drainage problem. Okay, part two of the planning application, of the numbered portion of the planning application, is the methodology for assessing visitor mobility and experience. And there's three parts to that. What is going to be your methodology for documenting the reduction in traffic congestion? Second being how you're going to document enhanced visitor mobility, accessibility, and safety, and how you will document the benefits of improved visitor education, recreation, and health benefits. For this section, you should be determining how the planning will evaluate your alternatives, and what measures are proposed to perform that evaluation, and then how the evaluation will be performed. Let's look at Anywhere Refuge again, and for Part A, which is reduced traffic congestion, the goal was to not have vehicles parked outside of the designated parking areas, The objective was to not have more than 250 vehicles in the refuge at any one time by the projected visitation of 2020. And the measurement of that effectiveness would be the number of autos in the refuge at any given time. This is one example. There could be several within this section to show how you would reduce traffic congestion, but laid out in a fashion so that you can see how you will be using, where it came from, and how you'll be using it. For visitor mobility, accessibility, and safety, the goal was to make the road safer for both the grouse and visitors, and one objective was to reduce the 85th percentile speed to no more than 25 miles an hour by 2020. So their measurement of effectiveness would be the average speed over the course of the road as well as spot speeds. Another measure of effectiveness here might be the number of grouse that have been injured or affected by vehicles that are using the park roads. From an educational, recreational, health experience, remember the goal was increase visitor interpretation opportunities. So their objective here, as you may recall, was to make sure that each visitor has at least 10 minutes of interpretation during each visit by 2020, your target year. And the measurement of effectiveness here is very simple, the number of interpretation minutes each visitor might experience.
Phil, it looks like we have one question.
Okay, I was just going to stop and ask that, so great.
And the question is, in order for my park to commit to a project, we need to know if the project can be funded for the term of the project. Can we apply for all the money for a multi-year project in one grant for 2011?
Could you repeat the beginning part of that, please?
Sure. They've indicated that for them to commit to a project, they need to know that the project can be funded for its entire term. So they're asking, can they apply for all of the money up front for a multiple-year project?
The answer is yes, they can, but I would say that they should not both apply for planning and for implementation funding at the same time, because a lot of the data you need for the implementation grant you will need to have obtained from your planning grant. But if you want to go through, if you want to apply for funding for the full planning grant, that certainly is allowable, and there have been a number of situations where where units have received funding for the full planning grant.
Thank you, Phil. That's the last question.
Any other questions? Okay, well, moving along here, the part 3 of the numbered parts of this application is the methodology for assessing environmental benefits. And this is not an environmental impact study or even an environmental a finding of no environmental significance necessarily, a FONSI, but it is how you will at least do an initial evaluation of how well your project that you will be considering will protect the environment, the environmental benefits, both the protection of the sensitive natural, cultural, and historical resources, and how they will reduce pollution. It's best probably to integrate this approach with the previous section when you were looking at visitor mobility and experience benefits, and again, focus on how you would evaluate the impacts of various alternatives on these resources and how you will measure them. Moving to Anywhere Refuge, remember one of the goals was to reduce the impact on the lichen, and the objective was to not have vehicles park on any lichen habitat by 2020, and the measurement of that effectiveness would be the area in square feet of lichen habitats that are disturbed by vehicles by the number of days that they are disturbed. Another one of the goals was to reduce vehicles in the grouse habitat viewshed. This is a pollution area that is probably the primary concern of Anywhere Refuge, and the objective was to have zero obstruction of the grouse habitat viewshed by 2020, and the measurement would be the number of acres of grouse habitat that are obstructed by vehicles. The fourth and final numbered section of the application deals with operational efficiency and financial sustainability. Now remember here that we are not expecting you to have a budget figured out for the application, but this is how will you determine these characteristics. And starting with effectiveness in meeting the management goals. And your unit may have had either a general management plan or another type of general planning document that has identified management goals and objectives for the unit. And the other thing that you might do here is assess how this project might reduce barriers to visitor use. For Anywhere Refuge, they have a CCP management goal, the CCP being for a refuge, very similar to a general management plan for a national park. And one of those goals is to improve the public's understanding of the grouse and the lichen. And as we've talked about earlier, so the alternatives are going to contribute to that education through better interpretation. Financial planning and cost effectiveness. This section should identify a timeline for implementation and how you're going to determine the implementation and capital costs, which will be what you will probably be applying to the Sarbanes program for a good portion of that, but also the management and operation costs, which will not be funded through the Sarbanes program. As Adam mentioned, operations costs are not eligible, and so that financial plan needs to look at that and include potential funding sources for the operations costs. And we like to encourage people to look at life cycle costs, not just the cost of implementing or maybe cost of operating during the first year, but during a foreseeable lifetime that this project would be there. If the costs exceed the potential revenue sources, you need to have a plan for how you're going to identify how to pay for them via either visitor fees or other contributions from local governments, local businesses, or others who are interested in the success of your land management area. So for Anywhere Refuge, the objective was to have all the capital expenditures paid through available grants and to have the management operation cost to not exceed 5% of the refuge budget by 2020. That is the portion that the refuge would have to pay for. And the measures of effectiveness are quite simple. The net refuge equipment and facility cost, that's net after grants, and the percent of revenue budget that is required for the operation and maintaining of the alternative transportation system. Cost effectiveness is a little tricky in many cases, but in some fashion show what the cost per visitor served would be, the cost per mile, the cost per operating hour, how you will determine that as part of your evaluation process, and consider you also would consider how the project considers your management goals. And in some cases where your objective is to shift people from one mode to another, what the cost is to shift each individual. So, Anywhere Refuge had a broad goal. We need a realistic cost for this. The objective was that the cost per user should not exceed $5 by 2020, and their measure of effectiveness was what that cost per user would be. A very important part of this section 4D, is identifying current and potential partners and identifying any formal agreements or letters of support that you may have from those partners. And those agreements or letters of support or some abridged version of those can be and probably should be included in your appendix to the application. The appendix, which I just mentioned, could include maps, photos, graphics, the letters we just talked about. An important element of any application, be it a planning application or an implementation application, is that if you are applying as a non-federal land management agency, you must have a support letter from the unit that is in your area that will be affected. If you do not have that support letter, your application will not be considered. And just a few examples of what might be in an appendix from Anywhere Refuge. There was a map of the different locations where visitors might stop to view. There's a photo showing a backup at the entrance station, and some other photos showing situations where people are walking on the side of the road where the idea is these photos are very helpful to illustrate the nature of your problem to the reviewers. So, in summary, what are the requirements for a successful planning grant? You need to identify the issues that need to be addressed. You have to have stakeholder support. You have to identify how you're going to do your planning study and what you're going to, what your method would be, and what that process is for addressing the issues.
All right. So
and I'm going to turn it back to Amber to do a poll right now.
All right. So our question to you is, after this section's presentation, do you plan on submitting for a planning grant? All right. It looks like all the responses are in, and I'll show them. Phil, did you want to make any specific comments about the responses?
Well, just an observation that we've almost doubled the number of people who said they were going to do it for a planning grant. The original poll said there would be 10. Now we have 17. So obviously, hopefully we've educated people in the way that they make them understand what needs to be done, and they will have a successful planning grant.
All right, so at this point, if anybody has any questions, we're certainly open to take them. So if you would please either type your question in the Q&A drop-down manager, or you can simply press star 8 on your telephone keypad. And it doesn't look like we have any questions right at the moment. So Jamie, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm going to talk to you about the implementation section. And some example projects for implementation could be acquiring, constructing, inspecting, or maintaining equipment or facilities. And this could be things such as storage sheds or multimodal transportation centers, such as what Adam had said in the beginning. It could also be bus stops or shelters. Another example is the capital cost of service contracts, such as leases. Purchase, rehabilitation, or replacement of transit vehicles or related equipment. The capital costs of coordinating with external transit. This could be if you need to put bus stops or shelters in your unit so that an external transit system could come in, or if another bus is needed in order for them to add a route to come into your unit. Non-motorized transportation systems, such as bike and pedestrian trails, or waterborne access systems, such as ferries. And he had referenced a ferry project earlier as an example from last year.
All right, so we actually have one question on the telephone. So Jamie, I'll just ask you to pause for 1 second. And the city that it's coming from is Phoenix. So you will hear Phoenix a beep on your end, and then when you do, the phone line will be open for you to ask your question. We'll just remind you to turn your phone off of mute so that we can hear you. So Phoenix?
Yes. My question is, going back to the funding, if there is no continuing resolution, if they don't, if Congress doesn't enact any more funding for bike and ped trail projects, does this round, you apply, but does this round even get funded?
At this point, FTA's programs have been funded for approximately half a year. So it all depends on what Congress decides to do at the end of the big picture when they enact a full year spending bill for 2011. If they decide to zero out the program for the full year, then yes, projects that apply will not be funded. So there is that risk. However, if they say fund the remainder of the year with no additional funding for public transportation's sake, then we will still have the amount that's been appropriated thus far.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, most likely, however, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, they've been good about funding public transportation so far.
Yeah, this is a different landscape, though, but okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, there doesn't appear to be any other questions at this point, so Jamie, if you can continue.
Of course. We're going to continue with our Anywhere Refuge example and follow it through implementation. So after they conducted the feasibility study that Phil walked you through, they reviewed their alternatives in detail. They determined what their options would be for financing an alternative transportation system, and what they decided to do was to purchase some used shuttles to create a pilot system. And with this pilot system, the operations and maintenance was paid for by the transportation fee and also helped out by the Friends of the Blue-Spotted Grouse. They deployed the shuttle on one route, and there were 2 shuttles that ran this route, and it's been in existence for the past 5 years now. And after those 5 years, they decided that they should conduct an evaluation to see if the system was in need of any upgrades and whether or not it was still a beneficial system. And what they found out from their evaluation was that it was a beneficial system and that they should continue it, but that there were some upgrades that were needed. And so this is going to be the implementation grant that they put in for, is to help fund those enhancements. One of them is to replace the 2 tour buses that they're currently using. The tour buses are not currently low floor, and low floor tour buses would make it easier and safer for seniors and families to access the refuge. They'd also like to purchase tour buses that use alternative fuels and also make them ADA accessible, as the ones that they purchased that were used were not ADA accessible. They'd also like to expand their existing ATS. They have found a section of the refuge where the bus does not currently go that is has growing congestion, and they also would like to extend their route into the community so that it will make it easier for people to get from the community into the refuge. So this additional bus route will go from the community to this trailhead. And while they're doing that, they figured they should rehabilitate the current trailhead as well. There's been some studies that have shown that if they had rehabilitated the trails for more use by bicycles, that would occur, that people are interested in having better bicycling trails. So they're going to rehabilitate this trail as well. So now we go back to, again, how do you calculate your funding request amount for an implementation grant? And you're going to look at your capital costs, so how much it's going to cost to construct, rehabilitate, purchase, or lease. Make sure that you round up your anticipated costs. Do not give exact costs for, especially if you're purchasing a bus, do not leave it to the exact penny, because most likely by the time that this is funded, you'll already not have enough money to purchase your buses. So make sure you round up those anticipated costs. Make sure you include inflation for the year that it's going to be completed. So even though you're putting in your grant for fiscal year 2011 right now, the cost right now may not be the same as when it's funded later this winter. Also may not be the same as if you have to do some studies before or an RFP before you can go out and purchase these buses. By the time you get done with that, and it's now 1.5 years, 2 years later, the costs will go up again. So make sure that you build that in. You're allowed to include up to a 15% contingency cost to cover this, and they recommend that you do include that contingency cost so that you're not starting already underfunded. Make sure you also subtract out funding from other sources, just like Phil was talking about in the planning grants. So now we're going to walk you through an implementation grant application. And I'm going to skip over the executive summary and the appendix because Phil covered these and they're exactly the same for the implementation grant as for the planning grant. Again, we recommend that you do the executive summary at the very end after you've done everything else. That will be your first impression of the project that the evaluators will have. And your appendix can include all your maps and pictures that will help explain to the evaluators better about your project. Make sure that for an implementation grant that if you're going to be attaching things, do not attach very long studies. So we do want you to reference them in your grant application and provide the most relevant information, but it's not going to be beneficial for you to attach 100-page documents because the evaluators, because they're reviewing 80-plus applications, they're not going to have time to read 100-page planning studies. So it's best just to pull out the relevant parts and put those into the grant application. So we're going to go through the 4 numbered parts as well as the project description. The project description, again, is going to be 2 pages long. This is an increase from last year because they felt that it was an important piece to make sure that you had enough room to put all of your information. You want to describe your current transportation system for those evaluators that are from other agencies who may not be familiar with your unit. Make sure you also provide a review of the related planning studies that have been completed and put in some of the most relevant information that they will need to know. And then you're going to describe in detail what the proposal would fund. So if it's going to fund a service or a system, you want to make sure you talk about what type of service it's going to be and the extent of the system. If you're purchasing vehicles, what type of vehicle you're purchasing and the quantity. And then if you're constructing a facility, you want to make sure that you explain what the function of this facility is and what the configuration would be. For part 1, again, there are 2 parts for the demonstration and need. There's the visitor mobility and experience and the environmental condition. And so we'll go through each of these separately. For the visitor mobility and experience, you want to describe the severity of the current problem or the anticipated problem, whichever it is that you are addressing. If you are going to be doing a replacement or a rehabilitation, you want to make sure that you explain what would result if the project were not completed. So not just the benefits, but if you were not able to replace your buses, such as in this refuge example, what would happen? How many people would then be put back on the road? What would be the breakdowns, those type of things, and we'll go through that as an example with the refuge. You also want to make sure that for this you're justifying your issues by using reports, studies, scientific data, and anecdotal information, real-life examples. And you want to make sure that you don't overdo the annotations, but you do, because you don't want it to read like it's a thesis, but you do want to make sure that you provide enough data so that you are justifying why you are doing this. Some examples for visitor mobility and experience are traffic congestion that's discouraging visitors from coming, parking shortages that are reducing the capacity at specific sites in your unit, visitor destinations that are not fully accessible to certain groups of people, and older vehicles that are no longer reliable for use. And some of the data examples that you may have that you could use in your application would be visitor comments, visitor use goals that are not being met, ridership and capacity counts for your existing system, and maintenance records for your vehicles. For the Anywhere Refuge, we're going to go through the different pieces of our expansion. So first we were going to replace our vehicles, and why were we going to do this was because our current bus is 17 years old and it's unreliable. It's having frequent breakdowns, which is not cost effective, and so purchasing new buses would be the more effective way of doing this. Also, we want to talk about, because this is a replacement, what would happen if we do not replace these buses. So if the buses do not get replaced, we're still going to have all of our breakdowns, and that's going to affect 30% of all current visitors because they use the transit currently and would put them back on the roadway. The shuttle also provides access to 3,000 visitors with disabilities per year, and it alleviates limited parking capacity. And so all of those things would be affected if we're not able to purchase new buses and make sure that they're reliable. And then for the expansion of the system, adding the new route and upgrading the trail, why we need to do that, and we want to do that to improve access to an area that currently has limited parking and also has long walks. We want to improve trail safety for the growing number of bicyclists to our refuge, and we also want to provide better connectivity with our Gateway community. Currently, in the system, there's a 2-mile gap in the service to the community, and so by adding this new route, hopefully that will close that gap and allow more people to come to our unit. For the second part of number 1, the environmental conditions, you want to, again, describe the severity of the current or anticipated environmental and resource management problems. And again, make sure that if it is a rehabilitation or a reconstruction that you want to talk about, or a replacement, why, what would result if that was not completed. So some examples for environmental condition are air pollution and clarity due to vehicle exhaust, noise, water, or visual pollution, damage to sensitive natural resources, or threat to protected cultural resources. And some of the types of data that you may want to look at is federal air quality standards for your area, if you have those, decibel measurements at visitor destinations, qualitative descriptions of the threats to natural and cultural resources. And this would be a good place to add pictures into the appendix if you have pictures like what Phil showed you of people parking on the side. So for refuge example that we have affecting the lichen and people parking on the lichen, we could put pictures of that into our appendix to show it more prevalent. For Anywhere Refuge, their example, for the replacement, if we don't replace the shuttle, then the refuge will be impacted by 120,000 more round-trip vehicle miles, which would also increase the illegal parking on the lichen. So that's something that would be affected if we do not do the replacement. Private vehicle traffic would also increase the average noise by 20 decibels, which would disturb the grouse foraging. And prior to the shuttle, there were 200 grouse strikes per year, but recently it's only been to 50. So one could assume that if the shuttle is no longer available, that there's a possibility that the grouse strikes could go back up because there would be more vehicles on the road again. For the enhancement and adding of the new route, the lichen is showing a 10% decline at sites that are not currently served by the shuttle. So we're hoping that we could stop that decline by adding in another route. We also, at the refuge, need to reduce the grouse strikes below 50 refuge-wide. That's one of their goals. And so by adding the new route, there's a possibility to decrease that number as well. And the noise is in excess of stated goals at many of the sites. And so by reducing the amount of vehicles, there's a potential to also reduce the noise. For part 2, we want to show our projected benefits in regard to visitor mobility and experience. And there are 3 parts to this as well. For the reduced traffic congestion, this is talking about traffic and parking congestion, and it's both within your public land, but also to your public land, so in the gateway community as well. So you can reference those examples in this part as well. For Part B, which is enhanced visitor mobility, accessibility, and safety, you need to address each of these 3 things separately, and we'll show you how we did that in our refuge example. And then also for visitor education, recreation, and health benefits, the same thing. You want to make sure that you're addressing each of these 3 things separately. For Anywhere Refuge, when we talked about reduced traffic congestion, for the replacement, delays are shown to form when the daily visitors exceed 1,000. The tour currently carries over 300 visitors on our busiest days, and so if the tour was to go away, if the bus was to go away, that would add 125 vehicles to the roadway. So we want to make sure that we're able to replace these so that we're not adding that many vehicles back on. Also, congestion would appear on more than 15, on approximately 15 more days when the visitors exceed 700. For the enhancement, this new route could accommodate 2,000 more visitors per year, which would reduce the annual private vehicle use by about 830 automobiles. So we're trying to show, again, not only how, what the benefits are, but also what would happen if the enhancement or replacement was not done. For the visitor mobility, accessibility, and safety, you'll notice that for each of these, we've addressed each one separately. So for mobility, we would increase the access from the community to the trailhead by adding the new route in, and also provide more opportunities to bike as an alternative means. And that would be done by not only enhancing the new trail, enhancing the existing trail, but also by adding bike racks potentially to that shuttle route so that people could bike one way. They could take the shuttle to the trailhead and then bike back out. Accessibility, we're going to make sure that the new bus is a low-floor bus and that it's also ADA accessible so that it will provide more accessibility to different user groups. And then for safety, for the Anywhere Refuge, because it is in a mountainous area, they're going to put in a retarder-equipped transmission. They're also hoping that by adding the new route, it will further reduce the animal vehicle collisions, and that by addressing the upgrade of the trail, it could potentially reduce bicycle vehicle conflicts as well. For Anywhere Refuge, for the education, recreation, and health, again, this is one that we want to address all three separately. And so for education, prior to the shuttle, only about 40% of visitors knew what the lichen was. And so now by having that shuttle service available, there are more people who are being educated by it. The new shuttle route will also increase the program participation by an additional 2,000 visitors, so we'll be able to educate more people. And the new route, based on the fact that it will go into the community, will make it easier for school groups to access the refuge, which could also potentially increase the education portion even more. For recreation, visitor surveys were used as this to provide data for this information. 25% of people surveyed said that the shuttle improves their hiking experience, and 15 to 20% of respondents would bike with improved facilities. So that's why there was the decision to improve the trail for biking. And also for the health portion, these enhancements are going to support both the Let's Move and the No Child Left Inside goals. Part 3, as Phil was talking about earlier, is the projected benefits for the environmental portion. When you see that for Part A here, where it talks about the protection of sensitive natural, cultural, and historical resources, and how to you would describe how your project is going to contribute to the protection of those things. For this one, you do not need to address each of the three separately. And the reason for this is because each of the land units has its own unique reason for what it's protecting. And one unit may be protecting all three things, and another unit may be protecting only one. So for this particular portion, you only need to address what is relevant to your unit and not necessarily all three of them. And then you have the reduced pollution, be that by air, noise, water, or visual. You want to make sure for this that it's going to be best if you are talking about your local and regional pollution, and not just on how the pollution is affected from vehicles. For the example for Anywhere Refuge, for the protection of sensitive natural, cultural, and historical resources, retaining the current system and expanding to add the additional route will hopefully decrease animal vehicle collisions to under 10 per year from the previous 200. The new route is going to increase visitor carrying capacities at the sites, which were threatening the lichen and the grouse, which is the main reason for Anywhere Refuge and what they're protecting. There will also be increased visitation using the tour, which will make it less likely to disturb the grouse's mating habits, which was one of the reasons, again, for the Anywhere Refuge becoming so popular and increasing their visitation. For the reduction in pollution, for this one, I want to mention to you guys that there is an alternative fuels training that was done by the TAC, and it goes through the Buffett model, which is the Bus Fuel Fleet Evaluation Tool model. And this training is available on the TAC's website under TAC Trainings. There is also in the handout section, those 3 white pieces of paper up at the top of this live meeting session. There is a handout that Adam will go through later called the resources handout, and in there it lists each of these trainings that the TAC has done that may be of value to you and useful with these applications. This is one of them, and it provides you a direct link to get to that web page. So for the new tour bus, it will meet environmental standards and have lower airborne particulate output than the current vehicle. The current system already avoids over 115,000 pounds of carbon dioxide, and the new system would save an additional 800 pounds of carbon dioxide. So again, we're showing not only what would happen with the new system, but also what would happen if we did not replace the current buses. The new trail will be built with a runoff collection capture basin to help reduce pollution. And a decrease in vehicle traffic is likely due to the new route, and that could potentially reduce the noise by 20 decibels and also decrease the visual pollution and interrupting the grouse watchers, who are our main group of people who come to the refuge. For part 4, we're going to go over the operational efficiency and financial sustainability, and there are 4 parts to this one as well, and we'll go through each one separately. So for operational efficiency and effectiveness in meeting management goals, you want to talk about how the project is going to help meet the needs of your unit, your region, or your national goals. You want to document specific goals from your management plans and other documents that you already have created, and talk about strategic and or ongoing management goals. If you are a non-FLMA applicant, you want to make sure you're describing not only how the project will help you achieve your goals, but how it will help achieve the land unit's goals. And again, I know we've said this several times, but you need to make sure that you have a letter of support from the land unit. That is a required aspect in order for you to possibly be selected to receive funding. Make sure not only that you're getting a letter of support from your land unit, but you also want to take that opportunity to see if there's a way to partner with the land unit and work together. For operational efficiency, the example for Anywhere Refuge is that there are management goals for Anywhere Refuge that were derived from the Refuge Improvement Act of 1997, and also their CCP and their transportation study goals. And the example that we've provided for you here is that they have a goal of preserving and protecting the habitat of the lichen and the grouse. And how this will affect the project is that it will increase the education about the lichen and grouse. The project will decrease the grouse strikes to below 50. It will decrease the disturbance to grouse mating habits, decrease the disturbance to grouse foraging, and also decrease the parking on lichen. So those are the many different ways that the project that we have proposed can help with that management goal. The second part is the feasibility and sustainability of the proposed budget. We want you to make sure that you have a realistic budget narrative. It must include 5 years of operating costs, 5 years of maintenance costs, and also future capital costs such as expansion. You should describe how the project will affect the unit's finances, including both maintenance and operations, as Phil was describing in the planning section. There is a budget template that is provided for you in the implementation application, but you are also allowed to use your own format as long as your own format provides at a minimum the information that is requested in the template. And again, to make sure that it provides the information for 5 years. So revenues, capital acquisition, and continuing operations and maintenance for 5 years. You also need to address financial sustainability. So making sure that you have capabilities for maintenance and a recapitalization plan for depreciable assets, and also making sure that if you are planning on purchasing or leasing, that you have investigated the difference between leasing and purchasing and the cost benefits of those. You're allowed to include, as we discussed before, up to a 15% contingency in your budget, and you are not required to do this, but it is recommended that you do so, again, so that you do not end up with a shortfall before you even start your project. And also make sure that you've addressed the cost benefits of the vehicle that you're getting and also of the fuel type. Especially if you're looking at alternative fuels, you want to make sure that you have the ability to maintain the vehicles. So operating cost considerations, things you want to take into account, are the salaries for the operators, both the wage and the fringe rate, and make sure that you look at inflation rates over the 5 years. Routine maintenance, you can consider that a new bus purchase would most likely come with a warranty, so make sure you take that into consideration. For insurance, if you're a federal agency, you may be self-insured, but a private company may have to have a commercial carrier, so make sure that information is in there as well. And for fuel, you want to look at either your actual costs, your average costs, but make sure you also include inflation for over the 5 years and not having a flat cost of fuel across the 5 years. You can calculate it either by cost per gallon or potential mileage. So for the Anywhere Refuge, for the feasibility of our budget, we did consider leasing, and what they came up with is that for this particular part, they needed to purchase new vehicles because it was difficult to find a 3 to 4 month lease for the window that they needed. And it was also difficult to be particular about the safety features, so the low floor bus that they needed and also the transmission that was needed for the mountainous areas. And the leasing costs were unpredictable over the 5 years. So those are some of the reasons that for this particular refuge they decided to purchase. The operations and maintenance costs for Anywhere Refuge are going to be covered by the transportation fee and also by the Friends of the Blue Spotted Grouse. Because they are doing alternative fuels, they wanted to make sure that they told evaluators that they do have a vehicle maintainer on staff who is knowledgeable about the alternative fuel that they have chosen, and that volunteers are going to provide trail maintenance for the most part on the new trail. And the purchase year is going to be in 2013, even though they are putting in an application of 2011, so the budget reflects this as well. For cost effectiveness, this is the section in the application that provides basically blanks that you fill in. So you want to provide the template data that is asked for, and that will allow the evaluators to look at the overall cost effectiveness of building and maintaining your system. You can also put in a narrative this year, and this is a new part. It will allow you to discuss why your project is selected on a cost-benefit basis above other alternatives. So if you looked at multiple alternatives and planning why you chose this particular one. And also, if you're not able to evaluate a cost per rider because it's not a bus system that you're looking at, you can provide more detailed justification of the annual number of beneficiaries. So, for instance, an ITS system where you can't give it's not a bus, so there's not a specific number of riders. You can provide more detailed information about how many people would benefit from the use of an ITS system. For the Anywhere Refuge, the annual cost for the tram was $80,000 and for the trail was $5,000. The average number of users was 8,000 per year for the tram and 500 per year for the trail. The tram fee or the fare recovered was $60,000, and the useful life for both was 20 years. So all of those 4 things are the required information asked for in the application. The additional information that we were going to provide was that the bus purchase was more cost-effective than leasing, and that we did look into that and provide more information on that, and that replacement was necessary because the maintenance was becoming uncost-effective. For the next part, you want to talk about partnering and funding from other sources. So you want to talk about show that you have stakeholder and community support for your project. If you have outside sources that have provided financial commitments, you want to identify those here. And you also want to make sure that you identify time-sensitive situations. So if there's time-constrained funds, if there's a source that can provide you funds but only until a certain date, you want to make sure that you document that here so evaluators know that information. And also describe the anticipated benefits for your community, your gateway community near your land. So for Anywhere Refuge, the partnership agreement that Anywhere Refuge has is with the Eastern Sierra Gateway Community Task Force. They, business owners, community members, the Visitor and Tourism Bureau, and the Chamber of Commerce were all a part of this task force. They also have a fundraising agreement with the Friends of the Blue Spotted Grouse, and they are willing to pay $20,000 for the operations and maintenance costs through fundraising. So we put a copy of that fundraising agreement in the appendix for this project. And there is a memorandum of understanding with the Adopt a Trail program that will provide the volunteers to perform maintenance on the trail. And again, we would put a copy of this MOU into the appendix. So the requirements for a successful implementation grant, you need to make sure that you've clearly defined your transportation needs and that you have previous transportation plans and studies that have been done. You want to make sure that you have transportation and environmental data that you can use to calculate your benefits. And we can't stress enough that data is the best thing that you can put into your grant if you have it. Into your application. A financial plan, a strong financial plan that shows sustainability and that you've thought through all of the different pieces of how much it will cost and how you're going to operate and maintain the system. And strong partnerships to be able to identify those and provide not only memorandums of understanding but letters of support for your project.
All right, so thank you, Jamie. We do have a question for all of you, our participants. So if you can vote, and the question is, after this section's presentation, do you plan on submitting an implementation grant now? All right, it looks like 44% of you say yes, they have the proper documentation and data for an implementation grant. Some said no, they didn't realize that they needed to do more planning. And there were a few that indicated either not applicable or no, they intended to submit for a planning grant. So thank you for those. I wanted to briefly at this time just ask everybody that if you do have a question, that you're more than welcome to either type it into the Q&A drop-down manager, or you can press *8 on your telephone, whichever one is going to work best for you. And while you're typing in your questions, Adam, if you wanted to do the summary.
Sure. Thank you, Amber. Thank you also, Jamie, for an excellent presentation going through how to do an implementation grant, and Phil also for the planning grants. I think most of our participants today will recognize that we've crafted essentially the perfect example. Anywhere Refuge has all of the problems, and they have a solution to all of the program area goals. We recognize that there are all different types of projects out there, and not every project needs to fulfill every single one of the program goals in order to be funded. Taking an extreme example, if you have a bus system now and your one bus that carries people is leaking diesel fuel all over endangered species, to come up with a super extreme example, we would look at that as a very important place to put program funds. So don't. Please focus your application on what is very important to you and what is integral to the project, and we'll recognize that if a project does not necessarily fulfill the visitor education goal or the visitor recreation goal or any of the other individual ones, please don't spend most of your application straining to answer that question and neglect what is the most relevant thing. So just to review the program goals, all of which are important: enhance the environment, protect the natural resources, conserve resources, support resource management goals, reduce congestion, and improve all aspects of visitor mobility and the experience and visitor access and safety, and so on. The timeline, as you've seen before, applications will be due May 9th. I want to breeze through this so we have time for questions. As you consider applying now, obviously the first step will be to consider whether you intend to apply for a planning or an implementation project. I was very happy to see that there was a number of people who had indicated in the polls that they've received more information now that's helping them to make that decision. Please contact, if you're a non-federal applicant, please contact your land unit to discuss your project ideas with them. If you are a land unit, please definitely contact your regional agency representatives and your national staff. You can also contact, if you're a non-federal applicant, we'd encourage you, if you have questions, to contact FTA, either myself here at headquarters, or we have a list of contacts in our regional offices that will be able to help you understand the process for receiving money through FTA and other program information. Information, again, is available on the FTA website. It's also on the TAC website. Please do pay attention to the program guidance manual, which is downloadable from the handouts today. That is essentially the textbook, or say Cliff Notes, to the presentations that were given today on planning and implementation grants. It has everything in a concise and hopefully a very clear manner, describing how to respond to each of the criteria and what the reviewers will be looking for. Clearly be mindful of the timeline and be ready to start the grants.gov process very quickly. So for grants.gov, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now because it's so different for so many people, other than to say that please do both the registration process and the application development in parallel. it may seem like there's plenty of time until May 9th, but when you're, it's May 1st and you're looking at that and you don't have your Duns and Bradstreet number and you don't know your authorized agency representative, things can get quite stressful. And we witnessed that last year. The Forest Service is registered centrally. BLM and NPS offices submit individually through the local field office, and Fish and Wildlife, you'll want to check with your region. Just quickly go through the handouts. The official notice of funding availability is up there. The planning and implementation applications, the forms are there, as well as a number of applications that have been rated highly in previous years. Those are listed for reference. Please don't see any of those as being examples of perfect applications, but we just wanted to give you an example of the variety of how some have been completed in the past. Again, the guidance document, the Forest Service has a best practice guidance for this program that was developed a couple of years ago. There's a list of contacts for all of the federal land agencies as well as for FTA and national representatives. A list of further resources. The slide that we showed on grants.gov is available. Also, information for the Forest Service and information on types of relevant data. So with that, I'd like to see if there are any more questions in the room. There's certainly material here that we had to cover very quickly, and there are most likely individual questions that can come to us later, but I'd be more than happy for everyone's benefit to address some now.
Great. We do have a couple questions. They're mostly related to the TAC and FTA and the relationship with this application process. And it's the first one is, can a federal agency submit more than one application, or do you advise submitting just one?
I would encourage a federal agency, well, I assume that they mean an individual land unit, to submit multiple applications if they have multiple projects that can happen concurrently. Some large national parks have applied in the past separately for a in-park shuttle system that they currently have, as well as for multimodal non-motorized pathways in a different part of the park. And it's certainly possible for both of those to be considered and awarded.
All right. And the next question is, someone is still a little unclear about the role and responsibility of FTA versus the TAC with regard to the program. And will the TAC be assisting with the grant writing? Is the TAC part of FTA? Could you clarify?
Thank you very much for that question. FTA is the federal agency that manages the program and oversees it. The TAC is the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Technical Assistance Center. They're based at the University of Montana at the Western Transportation Institute, and they provide no-cost technical assistance to help applicants and grantees develop and implement projects. FTA funds the TAC. It's based out of a university, so it's a nonprofit institution, and they're basically out there to help people. They do not write applications, and they do not review applications, but they do provide that sort of no-cost technical assistance for anybody who feels they would like to avail themselves of it.
In the contact handout, just so you know as well, there is a list of people you can contact that are available to help with the grants themselves, and mostly they're within your own agencies, but their contact information is listed on that contact handout.
Great. And somebody had asked whether or not the TAC is available to provide technical assistance in completing grants.gov.
I think that the best, certainly if somebody calls the TAC, and they're working on other issues and they have a question about it, they'll be able to point you to the right person to talk to. But you could also start with that, with your own agency's contacts to work through that. I don't know that the TAC would have the knowledge for very many people to help arrange that process. Grants.gov itself has a helpline that should be helpful in that case.
And somebody had asked if they could get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I'll just remind everybody that this PowerPoint presentation, as well as a number of great resources, handouts, and samples of previous year applications who have actually received funding, are available in the handouts button, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like 3 white pieces of paper, and there's a number of great information and resources that you can download from there. One more question is I would
also point out that this training, as well as the PowerPoint slides, will be available on the TAC website in a few days, and you can download them from there.
Yes, the original one from March 8th is already available, along with all of the handouts that are available in this slide today. All of that is available on the triptac.org on our TAC training page, so you can already listen to the streaming live presentation that was given on March 8th.
And the last question is, we're a small unit and want to look at the possibility for transit and or trails. If we only have anecdotal data, meaning no hard data, are we at a great disadvantage?
The answer to that is no. If it's early in the planning process and you don't have that information, then a planning grant can certainly help you to gather what's needed to apply for a later stage planning grant or an implementation grant. So anecdotal evidence that really paints a picture that helps reviewers understand the issues that the land unit is facing are more than welcome.
And the last question, I think they're actually just asking for clarification on definitions as far as references are concerned, but it's, say a National Park Service local field office can submit. Does this mean a park or a regional office?
Yes, it's possible for regional offices to submit. Most applications do come from individual land units because they're the closest to the problem and they're able to implement solutions. But in some cases, there might be, say, a regional office that wants to apply on behalf of multiple refuges in the region to conduct a planning study. That's been done in the past. Or if multiple land units that are in the vicinity of one another would like to band together and together implement a project. Last year, we had a planning study in Hawaii with the Kauai National Wildlife Refuge Complex. Applied for 3 separate refuges, and that was awarded. So that's a very good question.
Any other comments or items that any of our presenters would like to address before we conclude?
Phil,
I was just going to say that during the presentation I did receive an email, so I just wanted to remind people from the Forest Service that are listening into this webinar that, again, you do not have to go through the grants.gov process. They have streamlined that for you, so you'll want to download the handout that is about how you submit an application. It will provide you with the link for the website that Forest Service has set up that provides you with the 2011 application already filled in with some of the information that you need. It'll also provide you with your contact for how you submit your grants. So if you are from Forest Service, make sure that you download that so that you'll get the proper website to go to help you out, and as well as the contact information. And if you're from any of the other federal land management agencies, make sure that you're contacting your regional and national representatives, and they're listed on the contact handout as well, and that way they'll have a heads up that you are intending to submit a grant and that they can help you throughout the process.
And lastly, once again, please do contact your regions, the Technical Assistance Center, or myself or any of my colleagues at FTA for questions. Everybody's more than happy to discuss possible projects, discuss how to put together an application, obviously not, in a way that prejudices that application, but, please do stay in touch, and we're happy to help.
Great. Thank you all so much. Before we leave, I will bring everybody to the TripTac website. If you've not had an opportunity to explore the website, there are a great number of resources and some valuable information on the website. If you've ever wanted to attend one of our webinars and you've missed it, they are available, or at least the recordings are, along with the handout information on this website, as well as this webinar, which is recorded, will also be available for playback in a few days on the website. I encourage you all to please download the handouts. We will leave live meeting open for about an hour after the webinar today so that you can download all the handouts that are necessary. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you again in one of our next Paul S. Sarbanes Transit in the Parks webinar training sessions. Thank you and have a fantastic afternoon.
Since the phone's still on and some people are still here, I did leave out that Federal Lands Highway is aware of the program, and if you're working with the Office of Federal Lands Highway on transportation, they're certainly aware and can help understand the program. Thanks, and bye.